presentation is about how pay decisions are made and what you as a human resource practitioner need to know to do to ensure that compensation will attract, retain, and motivate employees. Compensation refers to the monetary and non-monetary rewards employees receive in exchange for the work they do for an organization. Compensation can either be direct or indirect. Direct compensation can be fixed wages or variable pay such as commissions. Indirect compensation includes the benefits and services employees receive, such as their healthcare insurance, vacation, lunches, company-paid training programs, and other perks. Over the past decade or so, many organizations have begun to refer to the total compensation package they provide as total rewards. The word rewards is believed to better reflect the many aspects of compensation, base pay, incentives, benefits, perks, and so on, and to signal to employees that they're receiving more than just base pay. Some companies even include development or other career opportunities in describing their total rewards. The goal behind this broad thinking is to motivate employees by helping them understand everything they're receiving from the organization in exchange for the work that they do. A key to successful compensation plan is the compensation philosophy that supports the goals of the organization. A compensation philosophy communicates information to employees about what's valued in the organization. A compensation philosophy ensures the likelihood of consistency in pay across organizational units and helps attract, retain, and motivate employees. A survey by World at Work, the Professional Association for Compensation Professionals, reported that 7 out of 10 organizations in a survey of 871 companies indicated they had a written compensation philosophy. A clear idea of a compensation philosophy and its objectives enables an organization to carefully construct a pay system that's aligned with the overall strategy of the organization, addresses internal alignment, external competitiveness, and employee contributions. When these factors are considered and the program is administered well, including communication to employees, the compensation program will assist the organization in achieving competitive advantage. According to equity theory, you and your employees will be motivated to work harder, provide inputs, when you believe that your compensation, the outcome received, is at the right level for the work you're doing. People compare their input and outcome levels to those of other people in similar situations. If employees know, or even just believe, that they're not receiving an appropriate level of compensation for their work, their outcomes, they will experience disequilibrium. This disequilibrium or inequity can be either positive or negative. When the inequity is negative, employees believe that they're not getting as much out of their jobs as they're putting in relative to other people. Faced with this situation, employees are likely to try to resolve the inequity. They do this in several ways. One is by asking for a raise or a bonus. If that doesn't work, they can adjust their inputs to make an input-outcome ratio more equitable in their eyes. In other words, they can stop working as hard as they once did, perhaps by putting in fewer hours, taking longer breaks, and so forth. Employees can also adjust their perspective by rationalizing why there is inequity. A final option is for employees to simply quit their jobs because they feel the inequity is too great to be altered. Internal alignment occurs when each job in a company is valued appropriately relative to every other job in terms of its availability to help the firm achieve its goals. An example will help you understand this concept. Assume that you're a manager in a financial services firm with 2 jobs reporting to you. One job involves working with clients daily to help them with their financial needs. The other job is accounts payable position, making sure the company vendors get paid on time. Both jobs are important, but the first job is directly related to the purpose of the organization, which is selling financial services. The other job plays a supporting role. Which do you think adds more value to the company? If your answer is the sales job, you're correct. Therefore, in establishing a relative worth hierarchy for determining salaries, the sales job would be ranked higher than the accounts payable job and would receive a higher rate of pay. Before a company can begin to establish the relative worth of its jobs and the pay for each job, it must have information available about the tasks, duties, and responsibilities required to perform each job. The information derived from a job analysis is vital for establishing the relative worth of jobs within an organization through a systematic process called job evaluation. The four most common job evaluation approaches are job ranking, job classification, point factor, and factor comparison. The first two approaches, job ranking and classification, are qualitative approaches. Point factor and factor comparison are quantitative approaches to job evaluation. Let's look at a brief summary of each. Job ranking involves reviewing job descriptions and listing the jobs in order from highest to lowest worth in the company. This process is fairly easy to do when there's only a few jobs. Accurately ranking jobs in a large organization is much more difficult than in a small. If you only have 5 jobs to evaluate, you probably know the jobs well, even without looking at the job descriptions. But what about 25? In this case, you'd be less likely to know a great deal about those jobs and be able to make accurate comparisons between them. Second, you need to do some type of framework just to process all of the information for those 25 job descriptions. You probably would need to be able to decide which jobs were the most valuable and which jobs were the least valuable without very much trouble. However, you would likely find it difficult to evaluate the jobs in the middle. Such a system is more difficult to justify to employees because ranking seems largely subjective. That is, it's the manager's judgment or opinion about jobs' worth relative to others. The job classification approach involves developing broad descriptions for groups of jobs that are similar in terms of their tasks, duties, responsibilities, and qualifications. The job description for a particular job is then compared with the classification description, and a decision is made about the description that best fits the job. A wide range is attached to each classification, reflecting the relative works of jobs slotted into that classification. The most commonly used type of job evaluation is the point method, sometimes called the point factor method. This quantitative approach uses a point value scheme that yields a score for each job. The scores for various jobs are then compared to determine their relative worth. The point method is developed by first identifying a set of factors for which the company is willing to pay. These compensable factors are chosen because they represent aspects of jobs that the company needs in order to achieve its goals. Typically, companies use compensable factors such as skill, effort, responsibility, and working condition, but there can be other factors as well. Remember that we're focusing on evaluating a job, not performing a job itself, so compensable factors should be elements that appear in varying degrees across jobs throughout the company. With the point method, a point manual is used to determine the relative worth of jobs. The point manual contains a general description for each compensable factor, along with a description of the degree of each factor. Once the point manual is ready, job descriptions for benchmark jobs can be compared with factor descriptions and appropriate points assigned for the jobs. Benchmark jobs are used to represent the range of jobs in an organization. Once the points are assigned, job grades are created to reflect hierarchy of jobs within the organization. Jobs with comparable points are grouped together to create job grades. A company may have one job grade for all jobs. Typically, however, an organization develops different structures for professional, technical, and other categories of jobs such as clerical or skilled trade jobs. Non-benchmark jobs can then be evaluated and slotted into the hierarchy. The factor comparison approach is a quantitative type of job evaluation that involves ranking benchmark jobs in relation to each other on several factors, such as mental requirements, physical requirements, skill, responsibility, and working conditions. A determination is then made about how much of the hourly rate for the job is associated with each factor. The factor comparison approach is actually a hybrid method for job evaluation that combines aspects of job ranking and the point method. Ultimately, this method can be quite accurate. It's also quite complex and would be challenging to explain to managers and employees. As a result, the factor comparison approach is used less than the other approaches. External competitiveness ensures that jobs in a company are valued appropriately relative to similar jobs in the company's external labor market. Companies make decisions about what they want to pay relative to the external market, and these decisions affect how attractive the firm is to potential employees. They also affect the attitude and motivation of current employees. To begin our discussion of how a company uses market data to set pay rates, let's first look at the process used to collect market data. We will then discuss how to combine the information with the job evaluation process to arrive at salary structures or pay structures in our compensation system. Salary surveys provide a systematic way to collect information about wages in the external labor market. However, salary surveys must carefully be constructed to ensure that the data gathered is reliable and valid. Managers can either conduct their own surveys or purchase survey data from a number of different sources. If you decide to purchase data, it's important to ask a lot of questions about the process used to collect that data. If our human resource department provides the data for us, it is still important that we diligently ask these questions about the data provided. Typically, salary survey data will come from companies in the same industry. For many jobs, it will also be important to collect data from companies in other industries that might be competing for employees that you're seeking. When the data collection from a salary survey is complete, the pricing of job begins. Job pricing is the systematic process of assigning monetary rates to jobs so that a firm's internal wages are aligned with external wages in the marketplace. It is during this process that an organization's pay policy line relative to the market is developed. Job pricing is a multiple-step process. It begins with managers plotting the results of salary survey for benchmark jobs with their firm. To illustrate how the external data translates into internal comparison decisions, we will assume that managers are using the point method to evaluate jobs. Let's take a look. As you can see here, the x-axis represents the evaluation points associated with different jobs that are used to map their importance to the firm. The y-axis represents the salaries of the external labor market is paying for those jobs. The result of combining the data for the jobs is a scatter plot, the dots you see in the graph. The market line, also known as the wage curve, is drawn to represent the relationship between job evaluation points and the salaries paid for jobs. The wage curve can be drawn by hand through the points so that all the points are connected above or below the line, or a statistical regression analysis can be used to draw the line. Obviously, the regression analysis approach is the most accurate. The next step is to plot the actual salaries paid for benchmark jobs in the company and compare the result with the results of the market. Once again, job evaluation points are used. Any difference between wages the company is paying and wages being paid in the marketplace is noted. In short, the wage curve shows how similar the pay within a firm's job structure is to the jobs being paid in the external labor market. The next step is to plot actual salaries paid for benchmark jobs in the company and compare the results with that of the market. Once again, job evaluation points are used, but this time the salaries are actual salaries in the company and benchmark jobs are used in the survey. If a company's wage curve is below or above the market wage curve, then decisions have to be made about whether to move the wages for those jobs up to the line, leave them as they are, or move them above the line. The company's pay policy will determine what is done and is driven by the strategic objectives of the firm's compensation philosophy and policies. Companies can choose to pay at the market, above the market, or below the market. This is the lead, lag, or follow. Firms must decide what they're going to do relative to pay in the market. Determining the actual pay rates for individual employees is governed by the pay range of the grade within their jobs fall. Employees in a particular job should not be paid less than the minimum amount of the pay range, nor more than the maximum amount of that range. To establish pay ranges, managers decide which jobs are similar according to job evaluation results and group those jobs into grades. Often, there will be natural breaks in the point spread for benchmark jobs to make it easy to decide which jobs should logically be grouped together into pay grades. The jobs in each pay grade will have the same pay range. Each pay grade will have a minimum and a maximum number of job evaluation points, as well as a minimum and maximum wage. The midpoint of the range typically represents what an employee who is fully qualified and functioning at an acceptable level of performance should make, and is drawn relative to the pay line the company intends to pursue. When establishing wage ranges, an important consideration is the degree of overlap. A small amount of overlap between two grades means that there is a great deal of difference between salaries paid for two jobs. In other words, the less overlap means the more difference between jobs in each grade. The overlap decision is affected by the nature of the job. When there's a lot of overlap, employees at a lower grade might actually have the same salary as employees in higher grades. Thus, internal equity as well as external equity is a concern in determining overlap in pay ranges. Grades and ranges give managers some degree of flexibility when it comes to compensating employees that have different amounts of seniority, skill, and productivity levels. In recent years, companies have worked to identify ways to reduce some of the complexity involved in the job pricing process. An approach that's worked well for some organizations is broadbanding. Broadbanding consolidates a large number of pay grades into a few broad bands, usually 3 to 10 bands or grades, as opposed to a larger number commonly used. The maximum pay for a particular band can be as high as 100 to 400% above the band's minimum pay. Reducing the number of grades by using bands makes managing the system much easier because the bands are typically wide enough that changes in the market don't require managers to adjust the bands as frequently. Another plus for broadbanding is that the pay range for the band gives you more flexibility to set starting pay for one of your employees and more room for you to give raises to your existing employees without going outside the band. When bands are used, it's important to ensure that there's some logical reason why jobs are in the same band. Managers also need to understand how bands work and how to properly assign salaries within the bands. Employers can also use market pricing to make compensation decisions. Market pricing involves collecting salary information from the external labor market first, rather than starting with the development of an internal structure based on the value of jobs with a company. Data is collected on as many jobs as possible. This approach came into vogue in the 1980s, in part because jobs were changing rapidly and the use of technology became more prevalent. Market pricing was the dominant approach used for job evaluation by companies participating in a 2013 World at Work study. This approach works well as long as data is accurate. Ignoring small sample sizes and other measurement problems can lead to incorrect inferences about actual market rates for particular jobs, so be cautious. Now that we have our base pay structure developed, we can talk about inputs to that structure over a course of time. As a result of inflation, many firms give their employees cost of living adjustments, or COLAs, to offset increases in the price of goods and services they purchase and keep salaries from lagging behind the external market. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is used as the basis for determining COLA. There are several common individual incentive plans that companies use. Merit pay programs, lump sum bonuses, piecework plans, standard hours plans, spot awards, and sales incentives are a few incentives used in compensation systems. Merit increases are not automatic. They are awarded based on how well an individual has performed. Like COLA, however, a merit increase permanently raises a person's wages. Even if the worker's performance declines, the previous merit increase still remains as part of their base pay. To offset the permanency of merit increases, quite a few firms are increasing the amount of variable pay they offer to employees. A variation of the merit pay increase is the lump sum merit bonus. Like traditional merit pay programs, lump sum bonuses are often used on an employee's level of performance. The primary difference from lump sum bonuses is they're not rolled into base salaries. They are a one-time payment. Piecework incentive plans are forward-looking because they reward future performance results. Under a straight piecework plan, employees receive a certain rate of pay for each unit they produce. Calculating is quite simple. A salesperson might be compensated $1 for every call they make to a potential customer. Under a differential piecework plan, the pay employees receive per unit produced or delivered changes at certain levels of output. For instance, we might pay $1.10 for all calls above 10 calls after a $1 base call incentive. Spot awards are an incentive that organizations use to encourage their employees to work towards specific outcomes. Managers give the awards, often cash, to employees on the spot when they exhibit certain behaviors or achieve outcomes associated with excellent performance. Spot awards give managers flexibility because they can be linked to a variety of employee actions at any point in time. Ownership plans tie employees' incentives to the performance of a company's stock in the marketplace. Companies use two primary types of ownership plans: stock option plans and employee stock ownership plans. Stock option plans provide employees with the right to purchase shares of their company's stock at an estimated price, often its market value, for a given period of time. The concept of a living wage is generally described as providing a fair wage to a person so that basic living needs can be met. Employers must pay the legally mandated minimum wage, but might have difficulty with the idea that they pay much higher wages under a living wage concept for low-skilled jobs. A few local governments have been enacting living wage legislation, and state legislators are looking at it as well. Comparable worth focuses on eliminating the gender inequity in wages because jobs held by women traditionally have been underpaid relative to similar jobs held by men. With comparable worth, jobs in the organization should be valued relative to other jobs within the organization, regardless of whether they're traditionally male or female jobs. The Davis-Bacon Act, passed in 1991, requires contractors and subcontractors with contracts in excess of $2,000 with the federal government to pay their workers a minimum wage that is at least equal to the local prevailing wages and to provide them with the local prevailing benefits. This act is administered by the Department of Labor. The Walsh-Hartley Act, passed in 1936, applies to contractors with contracts over $10,000 and are involved in either manufacturing or providing goods or services to the U.S. government. The Wage and Hour Division of the U.S. Department of Labor enforces the act. Under this act, firms must pay their workers the federal minimum wage for the first 40 hours they work in a particular week, and 1.5 times the minimum wage for any additional hours in a week worked. The Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, is the most significant piece of legislation governing what can and cannot be done in regards to compensation. Congress passed this act in 1938 to improve labor conditions for workers by ensuring they earn enough and have a minimum standard of living. The minimum wage provision of the act remains one of the most controversial parts of the legislation. Many employers argue that a higher minimum wage would have a negative effect on their ability to stay in business. At $7.25 per hour, working 40 hours per week for 52 weeks a year, an individual would only earn $15,080. This amount makes it hard for a single person to maintain a minimum standard of living and is impossible with an individual with a family. The FLSA also regulates child labor, specifies what types of workers must be paid the minimum wage, and stipulates pay for overtime work. The FLSA also includes record-keeping requirements. At the time of this presentation, the federal minimum wage was $7.25 per hour. There are certain executive, administrative, and professional, as well as other exemptions to the overtime provisions of the FLSA. This creates either exempt or non-exempt employees with 3 tests: the salary basis, salary level, and duties tests. Passing all of these tests means that a position can be exempt from the overtime provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Non-exempt employees who work more than 40 hours in a week are considered to be working overtime and are entitled to receive pay at the rate of 1.5 times their regular rate. Managers should use the Department of Labor's guidelines on its website to determine whether employees should be compensated for rest or meal breaks. The FLSA also covers child labor. Prior to the passage of the FLSA, it was not uncommon for young children to work long hours, often in dangerous jobs. Today, youth under the age of 16 can work on a restricted basis. Those who are ages 14 and 15 can work after school hours, after 7 a.m. and before 7 p.m. during the school year, but no more than 3 hours on a school day and no more than 18 hours a week. They can have an 8 hours non-working school day and 40 hours during a non-school week. Between June 1st and Labor Day, they can work until 9 p.m. Youth 16 and older have no work hour restrictions, but cannot work in hazardous jobs if they're under the age of 18. These hazardous jobs might include driving a motor vehicle, doing demolition work, operating saws or tools, or being exposed to other substances. Under the FLSA, employers must keep certain information on each employee, including all of the information that you see here. Payroll records, sales and purchase records, and collective bargaining agreements also need to be retained for at least 3 years. Records such as time cards and other sources of information for wage calculation should be retained for 2 years.